Hello and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living YouTube podcast. My name is Jennifer Hooper. I am a co-host of this broadcast on YouTube and on local podcast channels or platforms, I should say. And I'd like to introduce the other co-host, Mark Stein. Hi, Mark.
Hi there. Thanks for
Mark,
being with us
yeah, Mark is
again.
the founder of Thrive Co-Living Communities, and he has a wonderful vision, and we're just figuring it out as we go, right? So we have two experts with us today who specialize in rainwater capture. And I'm going to turn it over to each of them to introduce themselves so I don't mispronounce anything. And Christy, let's start with you.
Yeah, so my name's Christy Langendoen. I'm based out of Austin, Texas. And in Austin, Texas, I am co owner of two companies. One is a manufacturing. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, hook 'em horns. Yeah. And so one is a manufacturing facility for water storage tanks, as you can see in the back here. It's actually a project we did in Miami. And then the other is a dealership. So we are a construction company that designs, installs systems that capture rainwater or other systems that involve containing water in some way, shape, or form. We have a lot of similar challenges to Florida. I also am involved as a member of American Rainwater Catchment Association, which Heather's going to talk a little bit about. She's been with ARCSA tremendously longer than I have, as a board member, and I help her and market. And what we do is more getting awareness out there, that rainwater is a good source, a good option for a variety of uses, while trying to create standards for our industry. It's a little bit on me.
Awesome. Thank you. And Heather, how about you?
Well, I'm in a public area, so that's why I have to wear a mask today anyway. I'm the executive director for ARCSA and have been working with rainwater catchment for over 25 years. I have two books that I've published on rainwater catchment, have a bachelor's in landscape architecture, which got me into land use planning, which got me into working with rainwater catchment in auto malls. And from there, the more land I could get to park the vehicles, the better. So we started putting the water underground and reusing it. And that's where I started studying rainwater catchment. And that was my master's for environmental planning. And started working on a PhD in sustainability with rainwater catchment. And of course, the economy hit. So I started working with ARCSA more as the executive director. And we have started educational programs now. We have a manual that is just our manual, and we have training, and we have gotten into a certification process now, and we are a real trade, which is something that we have worked hard at.
Fantastic.
We have a good website, except for today, something's going wrong with the website. So I don't know what it is, of course, right? But there's a lot of information on the website if somebody wants to go and find more.
Yeah, by the time the video gets on YouTube and on the podcast platforms, your website will be all
Better be
set,
working.
and we will put it in the show notes. But for now, what is the website address?
It's arcsa.org.
Awesome. All right.
And you
Mark,
know
why
the
don't you? Oh,
you
go
know the
ahead.
parrot never talks when they're on the TV talk show. So same principle holds here. When you're trying to demo something, it's not going to work for you,
Yeah.
Right,
but it
right.
will by that time. Yeah. So thank you both so much for joining us today. This is an essential part of sustainability for in our plan, and we've looked high and low, and so glad to find both of you to talk to this topic. So first of all, let's talk about some of the typical uses for this water that is captured, and some of the uses that are not recommended for rainwater, and maybe there may be some caveats there depending on the treatment of the water. So talk about that as well, if you would.
So rainwater can be used for anything that you use water for, anything. It depends on what level you want to treat your water for. In some areas, coming right off of the roof, and maybe we should start with that. Rainwater catchment is off of a clean surface like a roof. And stormwater catchment would be anything that hits the ground and is able to pick up any kind of debris on the ground, oils or feces from a dog or something like that. So that's stormwater catchment. And we train for both. But rainwater catchment, you can use rainwater for anything that you use tap water for. And in some cases, it's better than the tap water. It doesn't have the fluorides or the chlorides or anything like that in it. And it is a softer water. So you don't have to use as much soap when you go to wash something. So it's very good for laundromats, for washing airplanes, cars, anything like that. And drinking water, you probably want to just test your water to see what's in it before you drink it, but you can go through a purification process and it's better than your tap water. I don't know anything that you shouldn't use your rainwater for. The only thing, again, some of the purification, like the ultra purification for some of the computer chips, things like that, they have to make sure that the water's treated to a very high quality. So I wouldn't use it directly for that. But Christy, can you think of anything that they shouldn't use rainwater for?
No. Every use, every drinking water instance, or even water instance. And I was going to list a few options that we use rainwater for here. Of course, naturally, irrigation, and that's kind of why I wanted to have this picture in the back. This is a Whole Foods, and they capture the water from the roof and then utilize that for irrigation, because that water isn't regulated like your municipal supply as far as irrigation. Fire protection. So
Right.
in Texas, and I think also in Florida, you have maybe some similar circumstances where there isn't infrastructure. And so when it is raining, we can capture and contain that water for fire sprinkler systems. And then, of course, drinking water. So much of what you can use the water for actually boils down to what your municipal code is, if you're in a municipality or your state, perhaps. And that's really where that regulatory side essentially dictates it. But from what Heather said, of course, is if we didn't have that aspect of it, you could literally use it for anything so long as you could capture it.
And let's say you wanted to use it for drinking water. What is, and I know it's going to vary by location, how close you are to the metro area, what the pollution is like. There'll be all sorts of factors that are site specific. But in general, would there be one type of purification process or technique that would get, let's say, 75, 80% of the rainwater to reach a certain standard that it could be drinkable?
You want me to talk on that, Heather?
Sure.
Yeah, so a typical protocol, and in our standard, it lays out different requirements, but a typical basic protocol is we have pre-filtration coming into whatever we're capturing that water. So let's say a tank, for example. What that's doing is eliminating large debris, for example, leaves, bird feces. So we have a method of pre-filtration. We also have something called a first flush, which is typically the first few inches of rain. You know, also assuming we're capturing those major elements that could be on your roof, or dust for that matter. So that's one mode of filtration that we call pre-filtration. After that, when we pressurize the water or go to our alternate use, typically on a lot of residential practices here, at least in Texas, we go to a carbon, sediment, and UV. The carbon's utilized for taste. So a lot of times pollens and things will get past your first flush. Or even your debris separator or screen. There's a lot of methodologies behind that. And so that's to get rid of flavor. Sediment is any little pollen, you know, to also keep that from getting downstream. So capturing it in the sediment, and then the UV kills bacteria. So those are the main things we're looking to eliminate to make it potable or drinking water. And in some instances, they do use other methods. That's just the main one. Heather, do you want to kind of add to that at all?
No, I think that's good. I think with drinking water, the UV is probably the most important. I don't think they use UV on irrigation, do they?
Not always, but
typically,
it depends.
so.
It really depends on the municipal code. In some areas where we're utilizing spray irrigation, where it becomes
Right.
aerated,
Animated or in the air, yes. And some people may want to drink out of your irrigation or wash in the irrigation sometimes. So yeah, that probably would be true.
I have a question about, does climate matter? In a place like the desert where there isn't a lot of rain, is this still a viable, I don't know what the system, I don't know what the right word
Yeah.
is.
In the desert, I bet you we do more rainwater harvesting in the desert than other areas too.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Just because there's less water here. So they capture more, and it just depends on your roof surface or your catchment area. 1 inch of rain on a big surface gives you a lot of water. So
Okay.
again, you can irrigate. You can't necessarily irrigate or capture enough for a lawn because a lawn uses so much water. But in the desert, you use a lot of drip, and it's one of the best things for that.
Heather, I don't think you said where you're located. Where are you?
I feel like I'm in Wyoming, but 9 months of the year I'm in Wyoming. Our association is a virtual association out of Texas, and at the moment I'm in Arizona, but it's snowing. So
Yeah, I have family in Arizona right now. They're having crazy weather.
yeah,
Interesting.
yes.
I wanted to elaborate on that a little bit, if that's okay. The biggest concern we even get a lot of times, the pushback we get on rainwater systems is, it only rains here really a quarter of the year. So that's not going to sustain me. Well, the challenge is your base design, you can only capture what your roof allows for. So kind of as a rule of thumb, every 1,000 square feet in a 1 inch rain will give you approximately 600 gallons. So I think on your roof, you mentioned it's 125,000 square feet. I think I had that right. I ran some quick math, about 75,000 gallons. Did I have that right, Heather?
Yeah, I'd have to run the calculator, but yeah.
Yeah, and so what we do is we look at the year as a whole, and we look at average rainfall during that month, and we size your capture, your tank, based on what you can collect from that roof, because obviously we need to have a surface to capture that, but we also size the tank so we can get through those drought periods. So really it's multi-variables that are incorporated, not only what you capture off of, but also your storage, because you hate to see during your rainiest months watching that tank just overflow and run under the ground. So a lot of it is sizing and a lot of forethought on planning and how big of a tank you would actually need to store to get through those periods. Now, in some instances, there's just not enough water. And in that case, then you look to well source or truck fill systems or even municipal supply.
Oh, great. Thank you. That makes sense.
And if your water is going to overflow like that, then you need to be using that water for irrigation outside or infiltrating it somehow, or get another tank and fill it.
So back to water quality, I would imagine that the type of roof that you have really makes a difference. There are a lot of tar, and I haven't even been up on the roof of these buildings that we're looking at, but I would imagine it's that black tar asphalt type surface on my home. And I mentioned it before the show that I have a cistern in my house in the country, and I have an aluminum roof, which I think is generally
one
really
of the best. Good. Yep.
And I used a septic tank that was on the property and never used as my the term is catchment.
Catchment, but that's probably more like a cistern if you're going to look for a name for your tank.
Yeah,
Is it underground?
it is underground, and I wanted to ask about that too. But anyway, talk about the types of roofs that are the worst, and the types of roofs or the surface material that are the best.
Well, your big boxes are probably got some kind of a paint on there, and it's probably not a potable paint, but it's probably a white paint because they're trying to reflect the heat off of those. And it's probably more of a rubberized type of surface, which is really not too bad to capture off of, but you would want to test it and see what it's leaching from that surface, because it is, rainwater will leach just about anything. It's more acidic in that aspect. But the new asphalt shingle roofs are really bad because you are picking up your petroleums and you're picking up a grit that can get into your system. There's also a pre-treated wood shingle that has like an algicide in it, and that'll leach into your tanks and kill your biofilm in your tanks, which you need your biofilm to help clean the water.
So in that case, if you have that type of roof, are you better off re-roofing, or are you better off investing in a really great filtration system?
I would
I don't
say
think
utilize it for something non-potable at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And I don't know if you can, a shingle roof like that, you can't get that algicide out of the shingles.
Okay.
And the biofilm is really important to have because it helps clean the water. So and that grows on the sides of your tanks. I don't know, Christy, if you can talk to that more, but in your tank.
Yeah. So in the tank, there's a balance. We have different bacterias coming in, and I apologize because I should know the biofilms a little bit better. I can't speak to that as much as I wish I could.
We won't hold
but
it
there is
against
a
you.
balance. It's kind of like your gut. You know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
a balance in your gut, and you don't want to kill the good bacteria versus the
Right.
bad bacteria. And so a lot of folks think, oh, I'm having this dirty water run into my tank. No, it's a balance. Just the best way I explain it is that how you would explain it is your gut system, right? If you take antibiotics, then you have other issues. So it's very much a very clean system, even though you're storing that water.
And it is like a body of water, like a lake. That water is clean. It settles to the bottom of the tank if there is anything in there. So we always capture from close to the surface of the water because that's the cleanest water in your tank. And after a while, the little stuff that gets in there and it's living and it's eating everything, and then there's nothing left to eat, so it all falls to the ground. So your cleanest water is going to be at the top.
And does it keep itself in balance, or do you have to monitor it and rebalance it from time to time?
Yeah, the biofilms really help with that. They help keep it in that balance. And if you kill those biofilms, then that balance isn't working like it should. And then that's when you get in trouble and you get kind of stagnant water, and it doesn't. And in some cases, you may want to filter it and move the water from your original storage tank to maybe a day tank or something like that filters it and purifies it for the day.
We use sometimes in areas where if the water is going to set, we use an aeration that ties back to a windmill. So when the wind blows, it adds air back in, just like a fish tank, to help keep that water moving about and moving around.
And keep it healthy. Yep.
Recirculation system where they'll pull water from the bottom and then recirculate up through the top. It's on a timer. So there's a variety of designs to keep that water still fresh.
Oh.
Is that going to stir up the sediment in the bottom? So
well, you wouldn't
do it
pull
like
from
the middle?
The very bottom, but yeah, there will be some sediment you'll pull from a little bit above the top, above the bottom. And even with our pump systems, we have what we call a floating intake. It's basically like a bobber, and it just pulls from just below the top of the water and trying to get as much really in the middle column. So we're not pulling from the bottom of the tank, and we're also, in case there's something floating, we're not pulling directly from the top as well. And that's what sucks. To prevent anything getting in your pump as well, and then not stir up debris. There's other different methods that we use even when the rainwater is coming in, that could potentially stir things up. So we utilize different, going blank on what they're called. Help me, Heather.
A calming device.
Yeah, like a calming device. There's different ways to do that. Some folks call it like a dog dish, essentially, where it prevents that water from going straight down. And
it comes in and turns and goes back up instead of mixing in the bottom.
Maybe some baffles. I would think some baffles might help.
You
too.
can do baffles in more of a stormwater type of a catchment where the water settles and then goes over the top, settles and goes over the top and settles. Yep, you can do that too.
Let's talk about stormwater and the difference between the two processes, because especially on the we've got a Walmart property that we're looking at, and you can imagine how big that parking lot is, and it does all flow down to a lake of some sort. We're in St. Petersburg, Pinellas County, Florida, so there are a lot of those catchment lakes, but it's heading down that way, and we probably could capture some of that before it gets to the lake. But talk about the differences between stormwater and rainwater.
Are you sure that it's all going to a lake and none of it's going underground and stored in those huge round pipes underground?
I'm not sure of anything.
And in Florida, the water table might be so high that that you can't do those pipes. I don't know about that. So maybe it is all surface flow. But the stormwater, you want to catch it and sink it as fast as you can. And you can serpentine it through the site so that it has time to actually absorb into the ground. Stormwater, you have to be careful because it does pick up all those pollutants as it moves. So the sooner you can catch it in maybe shorter time periods, the cleaner it'll be. If you let it run a long distance, it's going to pick up a lot of debris and oils and junk garbage by the time it gets to the end. So that might be really something that you want to put through a trash filter first and then through a sediment process, even like the baffles we were talking about. And then when it gets to the end, you'll at least have a little cleaner water to deal with. And some of those stormwater filters, they filter off the oils on the top too, or absorb them into some kind of a, I don't know, a filter of some kind.
that would
maybe
just be
use it more for maybe use it more for rainwater. I mean, for watering plants and such.
Right. And if you can, I mean, it might be a redesign, but it's more green engineering too. If you can change that water to go through your parking, landscape parking, so it would irrigate it as it goes down to that big basin, then you're trying to sink that water slowly as it goes instead of having a huge flush at the end. And you'd have to look at the engineering and the flow of the site to see if you could get that water to serpentine through your landscape, especially your little landscape islands on the way down to the big basin. Make sense?
Yep, does.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it makes sense to me. I'm learning so much. I think I say that every episode. Oh, these are things I've never thought about. It makes sense when you explain them.
Sorry, the mask makes your nose tickle.
Yeah, and please keep protecting yourself whenever anybody's nearby. We want you to be safe. Let's talk a little bit about the storage of it, external or above ground versus underground.
Now, the stormwater, typically you're going to save that or store it underground because it's already at ground level, so you need to get it down. But the rainwater is like the tank in Christy's picture. I mean, anything that's below your roof line, you can put it into a tank. And depending on how high your roof is, it depends on how high your tanks can be, right, Christy? I mean, you can even sink your tanks into the ground a little bit if you want to give you more storage.
Yeah, and really what you're looking at is costs too. Typically when you go below grade, you have a lot more excavation costs.
Right.
So that's something to consider is the cost. And that's why you see a lot of these above grade tanks. If they can, like Heather said, if we can capture off the roof, we'd go above grade. If it's something below grade, you would need some sort of catchment basin. You could even pump it. We've done that where we've pumped water from below grade in a catchment basin to above grade in case, let's say, and I don't think it's very common in Florida, but in Texas, we have very rocky areas and it's just virtually impossible to get that open and capture below grade.
And in Florida, it might be your water table. You might not be able to store anything underground because the water table might be there. So
and from another perspective too, educational, what you don't see is what you don't know, I guess. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but above grade tanks, it's a good depiction, a good visualization for educational opportunities. So if you're trying to educate your community on rainwater harvesting and the importance of it, it's good to have above grade tanks because they can see how that system works, where if it goes below grade, unless you have some visual representation, they just won't see it.
Mm-hmm. What about the quality of the water? I would think algae buildup and because it's going to be warmer, and then, well, here in Florida, we're not going to have a problem with it freezing, but talk about water quality above ground versus below ground and some of the considerations for that and other variables that I can't even think of probably.
So as far as algae goes, algae needs, oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
So algae can only really occur with sunlight. So if your tank doesn't have sunlight, you won't have algae, if that makes sense. So you don't want a clear tank because it's going to end up green. You're going to be growing something very nice inside.
Which is more than biofilm.
You don't want that unless you want to garden.
Bad.
So you got to be careful with, because there are translucent, transparent tanks that they do manufacture out there, but you got to be careful if it's rainwater, especially it's prone for growth of algae if it has sunlight. As far as water quality goes in storage, really it's that pre-filtration that we talked about earlier, capturing any leaves or debris before it gets in the tank, because if it gets in the tank, then it does become like a tea bag and it'll sit there and break down over time and make the entire tank, whether it's above grade or below grade, completely disgusting and destroy potentially anything downstream from that, whether it be a pump or filters or anything of that nature. Is there anything else you would add to that, Heather, as far as water quality, whether above grade?
I don't think that you would treat your below grade and your above grade the same. If it's a cistern underground, I think a lot of the Florida houses have to have cisterns now. A lot of them in the Keys have their basement is their cistern. I think that even some of the Florida legislation is now requiring cisterns in residential. I don't know that commercial is there yet, but I think it's residential. Did you have a chance to check on that?
St. Petersburg does have a rebate program, but it doesn't dictate specifically. And I don't know if you all are aware of that. It's actually small rainwater systems that they will pay for if you go through the process. So that's something to consider as you're developing. You may want to discuss a large scale, even though they represent a lot of these small rain barrel systems. But I did not find where the state as a whole was requiring it, but some states can, just depends. Really, what I see on a common basis is more your municipalities, like in Austin, all commercial buildings over a specific square foot have to capture 100% of their rainwater and either reuse it in some facet or at least hold on to it for a specific period of time. And that's more to address stormwater issues, but we're still utilizing that for irrigation, and in some cases flushing toilets.
And if you go back to the stormwater, if you are catching all your roof water off of your huge buildings there in Walmart, you're not going to have as much going to your catch basins. So that stormwater you're capturing and not letting it go. So it's not going to flood as much as it typically would with those types of designs.
Because of that, do most companies if they're going to invest in this form of sustainability, choose either rain capture or stormwater capture, or is it typically both?
Both that I've seen, they do the rainwater for more of your high quality water needs. You're flushing your toilets, washing your clothes, even drinking, whereas the stormwater then goes for your irrigation, more of your lower quality water needs.
Okay, great.
And you treat your water to the level of whatever you want to use it for.
That makes sense.
Christy, the tank that you have in your virtual background looks like one of those general farm utility
Yes.
types of tanks that could store grain or anything. Is it that?
It is actually, and it's interesting how our company, Water Storage Tanks Inc., was founded. And this is Corgal brand. The previous owner of our company was an engineer, and he was just doing it as a hobby. And he was visiting New Zealand, where they dominantly do timber style tanks. It's very common to utilize rainwater harvesting in New Zealand and Australia. And so he started bringing them to Texas, which was great. However, we don't have the moisture that they have in New Zealand, and the roofs over time were not successful. So being an engineer, he looked around and said, what do I currently have out there as a product that I could fix this problem, get a better roof system? And that was the where this design came from. And then he started engineering grain bins to hold water, because they have different engineering requirements versus grain. And so that's been the progression of the corrugated grain bin throughout history, is really where it was a need that he was trying to fulfill. And since then, it's really taken off since the early 90s.
And they have a liner in them.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I was going to ask.
And they are more architecturally visual. The people use them to be part of the architecture now too, kind of create interest in the architecture. So it's kind of a twofold, I think. I think it's great. I love them.
Yeah, and there's a benefit to corrugated versus flat steel. Flat steel is another commonly used tank, but we can situations like yours where maybe you don't have a lot of green space or a lot of footprint that you can install a tank, we can go taller so long as the eave of your roof is that height. And so that's somewhat of an engineering feat, not to mention the wind forces that we have to consider when we're going into Florida for hurricanes. So we have to engineer to all of those needs, or even the ground. You know, a lot of times there's different issues, and water is very heavy. So we have to engineer the tanks to deal, and the foundation to deal with those issues. So, you know, there's a lot of ways to store water. This is just kind of a neat one, and it's aesthetically pleasing. But those are some items to think about as you're developing your site.
It sort of looks like the beer distilling tanks. So maybe it could serve as a brewery as well.
Draw people.
In Texas, we have a lot of tanks at breweries and distilleries, and I joke sometimes because for architects and engineers, you do typically these brown bag events, these lunch and learns. But at this point, I just take them to drink and learns, because we can just go to brewery or distillery. You know, by the end of it,
oh, that's awesome.
It works out great.
By the way, Austin is one of those cool cities that we have on our list to expand to.
I've always wanted to go to Austin. Yeah.
Jennifer, I feel like I'm hogging all the questions.
Well, I've been asking mine as we go along. I guess one more question that popped into my mind is, you know, is it realistic for a project like Thrive to get all of its water needs met through catchment, or is it more of a combination of water supplies, do you think?
That would be a budget question. You need to look at how much water you need to do whatever it is you want to do. If you want to flush toilets, showers, water, you know, laundry, I don't know what all you'd be doing if it's a full living facility, then you'd want all of those water needs. You just have to look at how much rooftop and how much rain average, like Christy was talking about, what you can capture and what you can use. So it's a budget.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
have
It's
to
math.
balance. Yep, it's math.
That too, and I think it's important to mention whatever municipality you're going into, you really need to look at their municipal code and their state laws.
Yes, that would be your first thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and especially because you're a community. In Texas, we call that a community water system, and I believe it's very similar from state to state. But the American Water Works Association, a different organization, gets involved. Then they have very different regulations. So it really, in the beginning, what I would do if you're deciding, do I want to use this for drinking, toilets, irrigation? First, decide how much water you're going to need. Get an engineer to calculate volume based on how many individuals are going to be living there, and then from there start really looking at regulatory, because most states we don't have any issues with irrigation, but when you're getting into community, that may become a challenge for drinking water. Toilets may be a different story, but just see what you're allowed to do.
With transportation and shipping, the most expensive part is the last mile. And I would think that it's the drinking water that's the last mile in this situation. And I'm thinking that probably, and we're looking at 50 to 100 families, and each will have their own condo, and then there'll be common areas and common kitchen areas. But I'm thinking maybe since we'll be gutting any building that we're working in, that two parallel systems to do whatever part the rainwater can do, and then the other for the potable water or the drinking water, if those are not the same. Is it common with retrofits to do parallel plumbing systems so that the drinking water will come out a certain taps and pipes, and then the washing machines, toilets, that sort of thing from the other system?
Well, you can do that. You can have parallel systems like that, but it would probably be cheaper to just have your augmentation go into a tank and then draw all your water from the same tank. So it's a backup water that goes into your cistern. And then you'd
Okay.
probably treat them all to the same level, because you don't want, dogs drink out of toilets, but little kids could get in the toilets too,
Good
Right.
point.
By the way, I had a friend who lived in the country, and their dogs drank out of the toilet, and they had city visitors who were really grossed out and would not go to the bathroom in a toilet that the dog drank out of.
It's ridiculous. We have some water that comes off of roofs through a green roof, and they have the tannins in them. So sometimes it's already a yellow water going into the toilet, and some people couldn't handle that. So you had to get the tannins out of it. So it'd be clear water.
No kidding.
I'm sure there are a lot of things that we're not familiar with. I happen to have built my own home and did the solar and did the water, so I know a little bit more than the average Joe. But I'm sure there are a lot of things and important things that we didn't ask. So could you guys talk about some of the really important considerations that we didn't even touch on?
Christy?
Yeah, so it's really budget. 99% of my projects, that's what it all boils down to, is what can we afford? We may be able to capture the water for their needs, but it may not be within budget, because the tank is just one portion of that budget. Then you also have to consider all the plumbing and pumps, and if you have a massive structure such as a Walmart or what have you, you're going to need really big pumps to push that water and keep it properly pressurized throughout, and that's a significant expense. Not to mention the filtration, you're going to need it, your filtration really needs to match the pressures that your pumps are putting out. So you're going to need a ton of filtration in addition to that. And probably the one big thing that I would say that's most forgotten on systems is that filtration. A lot of times it's a maintenance item, and a lot of folks don't even like to clean their own gutters. So why would they clean filters or whatever? So those things are the biggest challenges I see on my projects, is just making sure we're balancing budget with what the water you can capture and the water you need. And then also making sure your system's properly maintained, because once you build it, it still needs to be maintained. And a lot of times it gets forgotten about, and that's where trouble begins.
I think the maintenance is a very big thing. I mean, a lot of the people bring systems that are failing, and it is because of the maintenance. It's simple, just cleaning, I
Right.
can't think of anything else I mean, it's very low technology, and it's just getting it in the right process through the right systems, and not failing all those steps. In our manual, we go through all of that too. So if you do have more questions, make sure you contact us and we can help you with that.
Yeah, and I highly recommend, I actually have it here, but I highly recommend, I don't know if my screen will, I guess.
Oh, I know. I always try that. I'm like, see, no. There we
You
go.
can kind of see it. I don't disappear into the green screen. Anyhow, this manual would be, a very cost-effective, explanation.
Introduction.
Yeah, that you can look through and get a broad sense of what you're going to need, the challenges you're going to face as you get involved with this project. And then you can read it at your leisure. And then what with whichever contractor you're working with, so you can be ahead of these things. So I highly recommend, and I'm not just trying to push ARCSA because we're with them. But
I am.
It's a lot to learn. It takes a lot of time to understand something that actually really is quite simple. But like today, you all have probably learned an incredible amount just capturing water, filtering water, pressurizing water. These are just base things. I mean, it takes a while to design a small residential system, better yet, something that is the magnitude and scale of a Walmart, where you're really probably going to need an engineer, and you're really going to have to take into consideration a lot of design time and budget time to wrap your head around, is it worth it to be 100% rainwater?
And fortunately, our architect is steeped in permaculture principles and sustainability. So I'm sure he's very familiar with it, but I bet he learns a lot through the podcast, and he watches all of them. So let's be sure that we have all of your contact information, and give a good plug, Heather. They should hire you as executive director based on that plug you just gave. But talk about the organization a little bit. Again, the website, what you offer, and Christy, do the same about your organization.
Well, ARCSA stands for the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. That's why we have the initials.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. And it's an organization, so it's .org, arcsa.org. We do training. We have webinars on our site. We did our own training at one point, and now we're third-party certified, which makes it even more higher level. We have codes that we work with and standards that we work with. We're working with engineers and architects and a lot of the professional rainwater system companies. What else? Our website has a lot of basic information. We have both a foundation and a trade organization. The foundation puts together all the information, the educational materials, and then our trade organization uses it to train. And we have our training materials in over 300 union organizations right now, where they use it to train their apprentice and older guys as well to meet the codes that are now requiring certified professional rainwater catchment people.
You know what? I did think of one thing that's pretty timely since we just got through the elections. Um, can you talk, without being partisan, can you talk about what we might look forward to with this new administration? I think that they're definitely environmentally conscious. Do you know of any um, initiatives that the administration has already signed off on? How is this going to affect your industry?
No, I don't know anything that they've already signed off on, but being more part of the world sustainability and working for clean water, I know that we're going to be working with more people, you know, to get to that level. And rainwater catchment, we only have so much water on this world, and it's only a small part that we can use for potable water. And if we continue to screw up our water systems, we're not going to have any water. So we're all part of that Biden's initiative to have a more sustainable environment in the Paris Accord. So that's really good.
I was just going to add to that EPA Clean Water Act. I can't tell you what year it began, but I think leniency has come through with that. I mean, there's already standards that we have to follow. That's why you have stormwater regulation. That's why you have to, at most, you know, municipalities require commercial facilities capture their rainwater. I think there's been some leniency on that, but I think maybe that will trickle down more so to state levels to where they will start managing it better. Because what I see in Texas, I'm not sure, I can't speak to Florida, but different municipalities regulate clean water differently or require different ways to manage stormwater. And I think looking at it from a stormwater perspective, even though rainwater's off the roof, it's cleaner than what you're going to pull off of a flat surface. Managing that better, we're going to have much cleaner waterways, much cleaner, healthier water in general. And I think we will see a much stronger push federally coming down at the state level. And then, of course, your municipalities enforcing that more so.
Good. And Christy, tell us a little bit more about your organization and what you do, and give us names.
Yeah, so I don't want to speak too much about myself because it's really more about ARCSA, but my company manufactures corrugated water storage tanks. Corgal is the brand, and Water Storage Tanks Inc. is the parent company. We still manufacture timber style tanks with metal roofs, which are kind of, if you've ever been to New York City, very common up on the roofs everywhere. So that's what we do. We also have engineers on staff. So they will visit with dealers. We have dealers across the United States. We actually have a dealer in Miami that will focus on your project and your site specific needs. So if we're dealing with hurricane force winds, we will engineer that tank to deal with those potential issues and help you design the proper tank for that system. Also, I work for or own Specified Water Systems, which is more focused towards Central Texas, and that we are taking the complete system, not only the tank, we're looking at the filtration, the pre-filtration, the pumps, and completing the system, making it come full circle. So reach out to us, waterstoragetanksinc.com. We love to help you, but ARCSA is full of great folks that can help you design your system. We're all here to help, and we just want to see growth in our industry as rainwater progresses.
And correctly designed systems.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, Heather and Christy, I have learned so much. This was a really enjoyable, interesting podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's lovely being in Miami here. What can I
say? Yeah.
And let's stay in touch and stay connected, and because this is definitely part of our design. And
good. Yes.
So let's do that. And thank you both. Really interesting. And in addition to what Jennifer said, just really educational, maybe one of the most meaty of our topics. So thank you both very much.
Good. Well, thank you. I got to go
Heather.
deal with my webs. It'll be ready
Oh,
for
it'll
you.
be fine by the time this gets out
Good.
there. Mark, do you have any Thrive Co-Living Communities announcements you'd like to make or direct people to the website?
Sure. Thank you for reminding me. Come visit the Thrive site at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. That's plural, communities.org. And sign up for the podcast notifications. We do them every other week. So please sign up for that. And there are all sorts of things that you can do to support the concept, from Thrive gear all to from t-shirts to hoodies for your animals, all sorts of things with
Face masks.
Thrive in it, and then ways to promote it. Amazon Smile donates a portion of purchases to us. Kroger, if you have a Kroger in your area, and lots of other things. So subscribe to our podcast notices, and you'll get all of that as a way to support the concept.
Awesome. All right. I think that's a wrap. It's great to have everybody here. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having us. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks for joining this episode of the Thrive Co-Living podcast and YouTube broadcast. To discover more about our mission and activities, please visit our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. There, you can also learn how you can support our creative vision and co-living communities. We also ask that you subscribe to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube channel and or the Thrive Co-Living Communities podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. We will be back soon.